we go. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to Remembering World War II through historical photographs. My name is Liz Crocker, and I'm a learning program developer here at the Royal BC Museum. And I am with Paul Ferguson, who is a collections manager for history here at the museum, and also a specialist in conflicts. Conflict history, that's what it is. Thank you, Paul. So thank you for joining us. Please feel free to put in the chat where you're joining us from, whether you're on Facebook or in the Zoom, it doesn't matter. We've got Jenny here in the room that's going to help us if you have any questions. We're going to be together for about 30, 40 minutes, and we're going to, Paul's going to share some photographs, and then there's going to be a short activity at the end, and we'll have time after that for some questions. But if you have questions as we go along about the things that Paul's talking about, feel free to write those in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. So without further ado, let me go to our more formal introduction. So yes, thank you for joining us. And the Royal BC Museum is on Vancouver Island, where we are on the territory of the traditional territories of the Lekwungen, the Songhees and Swetchum nations. And we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn on this territory. I'm very grateful to be able to live here. The Lekwungen people have been caring for this land and these waters since time immemorial. And I just feel very privileged to be able to get to live in such a beautiful place and work here at the museum. So for those of you that are joining us that aren't maybe from British Columbia, not sure where we are on the west coast of Canada, about as far west as you can get on Vancouver Island. We're that little red dot there. So right at the southern tip of Vancouver Island in southwest British Columbia. And there's a close-up of the island. We're way down there, right downtown, across from Victoria's Inner Harbor. And there's a picture of the outside of the museum. So Paul and I, if you look at that picture on the left side of the building there, we're way in the back on the left side, tucked away in our distance learning room. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the slides over to Paul for a little bit. And let's find out more about interpreting historical photographs. Take it away, Paul.
Well, thank you, Liz, for that introduction. Really great to be back again, and thank you to all our people watching us today. What we're going to present is very British Columbia focused, but please understand too that these events on the home front requiring the support of the war effort overseas and across Canada occurred in all communities, so all across Canada, all through the province and elsewhere, such as the United States and the United Kingdom. The home front effort in support of all the activities to drive a military forward are considerable. It includes everything from providing comforts to letter writing to being prepared for the potential of enemy action here at home. So when we look at the photographs that we've assembled today, it's really important for everyone to gather as many details as possible when you look at the image. So it's not just looking at the main image, the person, the group. It's really looking at everything in the foreground, anything off to the sides, anything in the background, and then bringing it all together. Be a detective. Ask as many questions as you can. Post note your questions and just keep delivering it as you're watching the photographs. Think about what the evidence is that's in the photograph. What are the people wearing? What are they holding? What's in the background? And just keep adding to it. What do you think the things are in the background? There'll be posters. What kind of posters? Draw conclusions, like try to understand what the image is actually of, and then make connections to what you know. Perhaps you're very familiar with the home front on your local community. If we show you an example of the Red Cross, does the Red Cross still operate in your area? Do you have a museum and archives that you can search their collections and come up with similar photographs? And then once you've assembled all of this, prove your conclusions as well. So how do you know that the Red Cross did certain things? What have you found in we'll make this easy. What have you found in your community newspapers? Or what did you find online at the museum and archive so that you know that this was happening all across Canada? And then we'll go to our first slide. So our first slide is of the Explorer group at the Tashme incarceration camp. It's in the Sunshine Valley, just outside of Hope. This is one of the camps that was in British Columbia that it was the Japanese-Canadian internment after Pearl Harbor, which was the 7th of December, 1941. And one of the reasons that I've chosen this photograph for today is I find it interesting that within this camp, this incarceration camp, there were activities prepared for certainly the children that were living there. This is the Explorer group. But the camp also operated certainly a Boy Scout camp. The community itself was encouraged to participate in the victory bonds, victory loans, raise money for the war effort, and create victory gardens so that they were preparing food for themselves as well. But when I look at this photograph as well, I mean, the obvious is we have a group of Japanese-Canadian children in the front. It is the incarceration camp, but when I look back, you're looking back towards the direction of Chilliwack, which is west of this location. On the left-hand side, there's a low building, a farm building, but just right next to it, you can just make out the barn that was built for the Trites family. The barn was actually built by a Chilliwack builder. And then you can also see in the background the housing that's being created to house the Japanese Canadians who were interned following the attack on Pearl Harbor. So it's interesting to me that they're providing activities for a group of people who have been interned. And then they're also encouraging that despite the attack on Pearl Harbor and the incarceration, they've also have this, you need to still be patriotic to Canada. You need to contribute to growing your own vegetables. You need to participate in the war effort by raising money.
You know what, before you go on to that, Paul, it just occurred to me. I know Jenny's in the back of the Zoom. Jenny, when you get a chance, maybe pop the link in there to the Landscapes of Injustice pathway, because it'll give more context if people want to learn or if classes are studying what actually happened during World War II with the governments and Japanese Canadians.
So our next image is of a group of women who have prepared a number of items for shipment overseas. This is a Red Cross shipment in particular of jam, likely shipped in tins. So you have a whole jam making production that's gone on behind this.
And this is going to the front.
This is likely going overseas. So all these types of boxes would have been delivered via the Merchant Navy, in particular to the UK, distributed amongst everything from troops to refugees, bombed out families, because of course Britain was heavily attacked during the Second World War. It's one of the few photographs I've ever seen of the actual containers used to ship these products. We know that some of and the women's organizations that exist for the war effort, it's very in-depth. It goes beyond Red Cross. You have regimental auxiliaries, the Red Cross, even the Mennonite community out in the Fraser Valley is making jam and gathering blankets, in particular for refugees. So it's very far-reaching, and it's that web of activity, all these different groups bringing everything that they believe is required for overseas, that it is so intricate to try and keep the morale and the support for individuals at the front and individuals who've lost their homes and lost their families. Mm-hmm. Notice too, we have somebody asked in our last session about the dogs on the left-hand side. Of course, you know, pets at this time, they're great for morale. Regiments often had their own mascots, which could be everything from dogs to roosters. So I just thought.
Can I ask a quick minute?
Absolutely.
So I'm guessing, am I correct, that it says jam shipment Did you know that, or was that on the label with the photograph?
That was actually on the label with the photograph. Now, in the case of the Mennonite jams shipments, I know that they identified the jam as being produced by their organization, whether that was Mennonite Central Committee or another type of auxiliary. But they actually labeled the jars or tins, whatever they used. And I've seen that written up in a newspaper article, but we've never actually seen the actual tin. Some of these things may have survived because they went overseas. It's more likely that a box like this may have survived than maybe in something like the Imperial War Museum collection, the National Army Museum collection. Same too for the tins or jars. Perhaps some are still here in British Columbia. It'd be great to have one for the collection, but at this time we've not seen one. So this is a great picture of the construction of life rafts. I speculate that this is done for the Royal Canadian Navy. It's one of our first examples too of really looking at the background. What's on those walls? What kind of tools are in the area? A lot of these posters that you see on the left-hand side and right up at the back will be patriotic posters encouraging people to do their bit for the war effort, perhaps encouraging people to buy war loans and bonds, safety, stressing the importance of safety in the workplace. If we go a little bit deeper, we have to realize too that rubber is in short supply during the Second World War. So things like, just as a segue, vehicle tires. If you're an ordinary family who do not need to use your vehicle a lot through the time of the conflict, for the duration, you were limited to one set of tires for the duration, so that there would be no wear. Rubber was in short supply because as the Japanese forces moved through the Far East, a lot of the rubber plantations were being captured, and as a result, the material was in short supply for production. So think of those kind of things when you see images like this. What is the supply of rubber? Was there the ability through salvage to repurpose rubber? Those are all important connections. Take a look at the age of the people that are working. They appear to be elderly. Elderly is wrong. Older people who may not be able to serve in the military. So people who are underage and overage were certainly encouraged to participate in the war effort. Another good image, this is a group of women who are working for Victoria Machinery Depot, which was a shipyard. And as we look at all these women here, they're all standing in line, they're buying war bonds. So basically a contribution, say, of $4 would net them $5 when the war ended. So it is raising money. They were encouraged to contribute to all the different war bonds that occurred throughout the Second World War. There was also war saving stamps. There was encouragement in downtown stores to take your change in war saving stamps rather than actual cash. So they would give you a 25-cent stamp and you would not get a quarter. You would that was your change. If they owed you 25 cents and you were willing to take a stamp, you could take the stamp. And $4 gathered into a booklet at the end of the war got you $5. Now, the women are wearing coveralls. They are predominantly working at a station, probably building a specific thing. Many of them are wearing a small celluloid button, pinback button that would indicate which branch of the Victoria Machinery Depot that they were working in. They were all color-coded, so that's something that we lose with these black and white images. In particular, I enjoy the woman that's third from the right, who is a welder. So think about women in the workplace during the Second World War filled a lot of roles where men had joined the military and women joined the military. But a lot of these jobs on the home front needed to be filled, and women were certainly brought into the workforce in a major way.
And there's like, it's a Rosie the Riveter look.
There is
there riveting going on here?
There is certainly riveting going on at this site. So one of the jobs here may be a woman who needs to pass a rivet to somebody, hold the rivet in place, and somebody's actually using a rivet machine on the other side. Notice too the posters in the background. This will be all, you can see the first one there on the left is about keep on saving, likely related to war bonds. And then between the welder and the next woman with the coveralls, it says, wear your goggles, more than likely, which is again this encouragement for safety in the workplace. Safety in the workplace is paramount. One person being away lowered production. But at the same time, they were also saying things like, if you're ill, please stay at home because we don't want to have the illness spread through the workforce. So safety, taking care of yourself, the nutrition books are published. It just goes on and on about how to take care of yourself through this whole time period. We get a lot out of these photographs.
It's amazing the detail that you can pull out of there.
Now, the other thing that occurred certainly with the enlistment of individuals into the military is we create a lot of shortages. One of those shortages is a lot of mechanics joined the Canadian Armed Forces. And as a result, we had a shortage of mechanics, certainly during the Second World War. These roles were filled with a large number of women. This is an interesting photograph of someone learning how to be an automotive mechanic and is a member of the British Columbia Women's Service Corps, which is a civilian body that was eventually absorbed by the Canadian Women's Army Corps. We can identify her by the armband, as well as it is likely that the beret she is wearing will have a British Columbia Women's Service Corps pin on the other side. And again, she is filling a role as a mechanic, learning how to be a mechanic. This is not uncommon with, it's not just the BC Women's Service Corps who's learning how to do this. It's not just like here we have a soldier helping with instruction from the Royal Canadian Army Ordnance Corps. Large corporations such as Ford and others had whole courses on automotive mechanics. Where, at the end of, once they were graduated, there was usually a large photograph taken of them and given to them, and they're all in coveralls, they're wearing insignia. Really interesting time. The one thing, again, when you don't have color, I know that the British Columbia Women's Service Corps, you could identify them by the type of what color tie they were wearing. It said which part of the service they were involved in within their own unit. Here we have a group of nurses at Vancouver General Hospital, and they're holding children. One in the middle is in linen, wrapped in linen. But the two others that we can see in this image are wrapped in this canvas and rubber respirator, which allows the entire child to fit within the respirator. And the one woman in the foreground, you can see that she is actually using the pump to have air circulate through the mask. These respirators are really important. Of course, a child this small would be unable to have a face respirator held in place for any length of time. There is a whole concern for the possibility of air raids, particularly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, 7th of December 1941. So everything was being done to ensure safety amongst the civil population, the military population. There's all kinds of different respirators. These were distributed quite freely out of all communities across British Columbia. And so air raid precautions who were developed very early on in the Second World War had some difficulty until the attack on Pearl Harbor for them to be taken seriously. It was considered, well, nothing is going to happen here. And then all of a sudden in December of 41, people got more anxious and wanted to be prepared in a much bigger way.
And December of 41, Pearl Harbor, is that what you're talking
December
about?
7th, Pearl Harbor. Here we have two ladies and others in the background preparing the shipment of comforts for distribution overseas or perhaps across Canada. You will note that there are stacks of shirts here. They're engaged in folding things. There's I think even the woman wearing the Red Cross coverall is also folding a shirt or sweater. There is so much coordination of activity by the Red Cross during the Second World War. They had learned a lot from the First World War about what they needed to focus on, how to make it more streamlined, how to make it more efficient, why they needed a bigger coordinated effort rather than allowing a lot of different groups who were all contributing to the war effort to produce their own things. So in the Second World War, you get a lot of brochures are being produced on how to knit comforts, what do we need, why do we need it, what color does it need to be made in. But also they were organizing volunteers as they did in the First World War. They were, Red Cross was certainly encourage people to donate funds so that they could actually purchase supplies for these volunteer knitters to create these goods that were needed. And in some instances, there were a building where perhaps the large meeting room was devoted completely to sewing circles of volunteers.
And Paul, someone's asking, how did the supplies safely get to the soldiers?
Well, that's a great question. So when you have the number one thing is let's use, for example, that we're sending this to the United Kingdom. So this material has to travel, we're in Victoria, it has to get across to Vancouver. It's likely shipped by rail to Nova Scotia or Montreal, where then the Merchant Navy is then going to take it across the Atlantic. That is a big peril there because the U-boat campaign is in full effect. We certainly lost vessels off the east coast of Canada, St. Lawrence Seaway. And then once overseas, you will have the coordination of this material, probably organized by British Red Cross authorities for distribution. The Canadian Red Cross was also operating overseas as well. So one of the things that's really critical to this is where is the need, identifying where the need is. There is no point in sending an overabundance of material to such and such a place when there's a lot of other areas that could use it. So just think about that coordination and that kind of reporting and that kind of detail that's got to be kept track of.
Yeah, that's a lot of coordinating and organizing. Thanks for that question.
This is one of the kind of pictures that I really enjoy. So far, we've seen a lot of things that are really kind of obvious that it's military history. This is Burrard Shipyards at the end of a shift. Now, Vancouver in particular was a real bed of shipbuilding during the Second World War, producing Victory ships, Park ships, and so on. Now, what I like about this photograph is it's a whole shift of workers. Now, if we didn't have the 1944 date, perhaps we wouldn't recognize this for what it is. But when I see something like this, we've got the cranes in the back, we've got the ships being built. But knowing that when a shift changed into a community like Vancouver, it puts a huge amount of pressure on local transportation. So then we have to think about the coordination of how do we limit that effect? We can limit that effect by, can we provide more buses? Can we do some rescheduling? Can we ensure that all the big organizations that are producing for the war effort are not ringing the end of shift bell? I guess they wouldn't ring it, would they? Because they're usually using steam whistles. Okay. That they don't, that end of shift is not always at the same time. So one company might end their second shift of the day at 5 p.m., right, but another company might end their second shift of the day at 4. So they're trying to stagger it. The other thing that I like about this picture too is all these individuals who've moved into Vancouver for shipbuilding, they also need a place to live. So there's a huge pressure on housing in all these communities, even in a community like Chilliwack. You have the whole creation of the engineers base, which brings in a whole group of military individuals, a whole civilian component that comes into this. And Chilliwack suffered desperately from a shortage, and it's advertised throughout the newspaper as do you have housing available? Where can we create housing? So that's another thing to think about when you look at these pictures is where do these people live? How far out of the community do they live? How many shifts are going on per day? Because a lot of these places ran 24/7.
And do you know, is Burrard Shipyards in the North Shore of Vancouver?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, I think so. Correct us if anyone knows for sure.
Now this is another great picture. This is a Chinese Canadian in Richmond, British Columbia. He's operating a water pump with the air raid precautions. We know that from the armband. He's wearing a military helmet, that was also issued to civilians, particularly in air raid precautions. And when I look at something like this, he's being trained on how to use a water pump, how to provide water to the firefighting departments. Firefighting is a whole other branch of civil defense. And these machines, we were preparing for possible attack. So if British Columbia was attacked, like say, for example, Richmond, where's the water going to come from? How is it going to get there? We can't just rely on pumper trucks. We have to rely on vehicles transporting water pumps to sources of water. That can be anything from a water reservoir to a river. We have to think about what happens because in an attack, you will lose water reservoirs, you will lose the access to water through damage to hoses, damage to hydrants. What happens if you're dealing in an area, if you've put the suction device into the river, but there's been a change in tide? Or what happens if the attack occurs when it's a low tide and you have no access to water? So when I look at a picture like this, I think about those kind of things. I especially think of the London Blitz in 1940 and 41, where so many of these small engines for water pumping were actually initially trailered by a number of requisitioned taxi cabs because there was such a shortage of vehicles in order to get water to the places that it was required. These water pumps and other firefighting equipment is so important because at the end of the Second World War, most of this equipment was distributed to volunteer fire departments across Canada. It was repurposed. So it is not uncommon to go into a small fire department, even today, and see some of this equipment, not necessarily in use, but still on site. There's a wonderful example of this. I think it's the Machosen Fire Department, which is on the way to our new Park Campus building, where you can actually see air raid sirens on their rooftop and a number of other things through the window that were used for civil defense. Then we have this picture of, again, Chinese Canadians in practice dealing with casualties related to an attack. So we have 4 individuals here. We have a leader on the right with his white helmet and the air raid precautions armband. And then there's 3 women here treating a casualty. Now, notice in particular the shape of the stretcher. That stretcher is made out of metal. And what fascinates me about this is these are exactly the same kind of stretchers that were created for use during the Blitz in London. A lot of the cast iron fencing in London was removed to repurpose the metal for the war effort. And in some areas, you can actually see where this stretcher, which was made out of repurposed metal, returned in place in exactly this shape. Perhaps the handles at the end have been trimmed down a bit, but even the bend that you can see is the footings. You see it in the fences in London if you know where to look. The gentleman on the left-hand side is another medic. He has an air raid precautions haversack that likely contains medical supplies. Again, look in the background. Posters.
I see the posters.
You see the posters. So on the left, we have one of the patriotic posters, "Tighten Your Grip," which shows a blacksmith tong crushing the German swastika, because this is something that is all contributing to the war effort, encouraging people to do their bit. I can't tell exactly what the second poster is. I don't know if they're aircraft, but the third one with the gentleman on it, that is, it's on the immediate right. That's in support of the Merchant Navy, who were so vital to the war effort and were targeted by the German Kriegsmarine out in the Atlantic and elsewhere, destroying vital supplies and, of course, tremendous loss of life. You have a question?
A question. So they're practicing here. This is clearly a practice, but someone is asking in the chat, were there ever any air raids in Canada in World War II?
Great question. Certainly nothing really large. In British Columbia, we certainly had the Japanese Navy fired on Estevan Point.
Estevan Point.
It's on Vancouver Island on the north. Then we have Japanese fire balloons were sent from the Pacific Islands, Japanese occupied islands. These fire balloons were designed to set the forests on fire in British Columbia. They landed in Western Canada and the United States. They included anti-personnel bombs. They included other smaller devices as well as incendiaries. They were sent over at the wrong time of the year. And as a result, because the forests were so wet, they weren't really effective in creating fire. The problem was they had so many anti-personnel devices on them that they were still lethal. And there was a family in the States who lost their lives when they discovered one of these during a family picnic. I have seen at least 3 of these fire balloon rings. There's a chandelier that's all metal. That's what survives. Sometimes you see fragments of the rubber where somebody's written on it that that's what it was from. The Canadian War Museum has one. The Canadian Engineers Museum in Gagetown has one. You might still be able to find these in the forest. Well, you wouldn't go looking for them.
No.
But if you ran across one, it should be reported because there are anti-personnel material on them. This is an interesting image. Sadly, I don't know what organization this is for, but they're very proud of the fact that they have received a fundraising pennant for one of the victory loans. They've achieved their quota. So for all the different victory loans that occurred during the Second World War, I think there was 9 different loans at different time periods, organizations and communities were encouraged to raise, let's say, $50,000. Tremendous publicity for that, a lot of friendly competition. Who is going to be the first to achieve their quota, which was, again, well documented in newspapers. Anybody who achieved their quota received one of these flags. We know that this is the 5th victory loan because the letter V is the number 5 in Roman numerals. But we also know that this pennant also has a crest from the 7th victory loan. So they've achieved their quota twice. And as I said, it was very friendly rivalry between communities. If you were to read the Chilliwack Progress newspaper, you would see that competition that exists between Abbotsford, Chilliwack, Agassiz, who's going to get there first.
Fraser
I mean,
Valley.
Agassiz is not a very big community, but they were still in the picture.
Do you know what color the pennant is?
That one's likely red,
Okay.
with the gold wreath and a gold colored V.
Okay.
The little number 7, that's going to be, I think it's blue and white stripes.
Okay. All right. So I think you just have a few more left, and then we're gonna. Ooh, that was the last one. Great timing, Paul. Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to say too that you could do this if you're not here in British Columbia. Paul's sourced these photographs from the BC Archives, which is right here at the Royal BC Museum. But wherever you're joining us from, most archives, well, city and provincial and national archives have at least some of their collection digitized these days. So you could either go in person or online. It's amazing what you can find that is already digitized. And you can search for images from World War II if you wanted to see if you can apply some of these techniques that Paul is teaching us on photographs from your community, if these ones that we're sharing aren't from your community. So just to remind you, so we're going to show you 3 photographs. I'm going to give you a little bit of time with each one to see if you can figure out what's going on using some of the tips that Paul has given us. And just to remind you, so he's encouraged us to be a detective. Is there any evidence in the photo? Can you draw any conclusions? Do you have knowledge about something in there? Can you make connections between what you might know about something and what you're seeing in the photograph? And if it's something you don't know, can you make a note of it and think, look it up, do some research afterwards? And is there a way that you can prove any of the conclusions? Okay, so without further ado, we're going to go to the next one. And then you're going to give us we're going to ask for Paul's opinion. But feel free, we're going to switch. This is the first photo. I'm going to set my timer here. We're going to start with a minute and see how we do. So just going to give you a chance to have a look. And then we'll pick Paul's brain about this. Feel free if you want to, if you haven't make any observations or questions about this image, feel free to put it in the chat. Or not. Well, I immediately noticed this adorable dress on this child. Okay, somebody's noticed, I think that's a gas mask there. I'm curious about the letters on that fellow's helmet. Yeah, I wonder where they are. What's the background going on there? It looks like in this lower right-hand corner, is that a bag he's carrying, or is that his uniform? Okay, just a few more seconds for you to have a look at it. Okay. Somebody says, looks like the girl is reading something. Yeah, it does, what she's looking at. Perhaps not reading, but looking. We'll see. She could be a genius. Okay, Paul, what's going on here?
Sadly, I have no idea what she's looking at.
Yeah, we can.
But when we look at this picture, we can see that we have an individual from air raid precautions. We can see that from the helmet, the last two letters, RP. There'll be an A in front of that, just to the left,
yeah.
Air Raid Precautions, a civilian organization run in British Columbia by the BC Provincial Police, or at least administered by the BC Provincial Police. He's wearing a haversack that will contain a Air Raid Precautions respirator. More on what that looks like shortly. The girl herself, though, is holding in the crook of her arm what is called a Mickey Mouse gas mask. And that's exactly what they were called. It was especially designed for children to encourage them to continue wearing their mask. Brightly colored blues and oranges, well worth putting into a search engine, Mickey Mouse gas mask, and you'll see these tremendously bright colors. And again, this was specially designed to encourage the kids to wear them when required.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, next photograph. Let's set my timer again. Give you a minute to have a look at that. Okay, there's some signs. There's some uniforms. Somebody's noticed there's a map in the background. Anything else you can notice there? They're all very busy doing something. I had no idea there was a civil defense control room. That's what the description is.
And this is just in the city of Vancouver.
In Vancouver, so
they're elsewhere as
all
well.
the centers, wow. Okay, about 10 more seconds. And then we're gonna see what Paul said. Oh, I see somebody in the back there that looks a little different. Okay, Paul, give us some clues. What do you think's what's going on? What do you notice in here?
So this is an operational room, a headquarters for civil defense in case Vancouver is attacked. So think again about the tremendous organization that has to go into supplying everything related to civil defense, firefighting, care for individuals who've been injured, providing housing for people who've lost their homes. So this is a coordinated effort to deal with the immediate action, enemy action, and then as well think to the next step of how do we provide for the people who've who've lost everything or some things. The signs indicate we have casualty service. So those people involved with casualty service are informing people as to what to do, and runners are sent to the different air raid stations that exist in Vancouver to say, this is what you need to do, this is how we need to prepare, this is where to take the casualties to. You have the fire department, who of course are dealing with the fires. We have the director of operations right in the center, who is informing all these other little signs that are around him as to what is going on. The next group is deciding how they're going to deal with it. And then, of course, the people that are actually on the ground at the specific sites are dealing with that. One of the ways, this is heavily involved with communications. Now, the interesting fellow I find in this is in the background. You can see him, he's the smallest fellow in the far left corner. Above his station is a sign that says messenger. So he is a Boy Scout. He is wearing a armband from the Boy Scouts that will either say something like Boy Scout Messenger or Boy Scout on National Service. He has two kerosene lamps behind him that are used to light the path, because in an air raid you may lose everything from water service, power, and you need to find your way. So there's some immediate emergency materials there. If you want to know more about how these efforts were coordinated, I would recommend a British book, actually. It's not uncommon. It's called Frontline, and there's actually a really good description of how civil defense services actually operated in wartime. There's, it's like a flow chart on different pages as to what happens next through all the different stages. So that's really good.
Oh, what's the title again? Jenny can maybe.
Frontline.
Frontline. Okay, Jenny might be able to
The
type
other
that
thing,
into the chat.
I'm sorry to take up more time, but it's really curious to me who the two ladies are in uniform on the right-hand side. Those women are likely in paramilitary units. I believe the one in the darker uniform, who's to the right of the lady wearing the hat with the large ribbon on it that's white, I think she is one of the ambulance drivers for air raid precautions who had their own unit, and I'm not exactly sure who the one is on this side. So, next.
Okay. Last one, because we're almost out of time here. Interesting. Okay, set the timer. Got 1 minute. I'll look at this one.
I think Jenny's asked us who the book Frontline is by, and I think it's from a government ministry. Maybe we can put that up
Is
on
it a
something later.
Canadian book?
No, it's British.
British book. Okay.
There's the home front has been done in a little bit in Canada, but not really any detail, nor really by community.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly noticing what these people are wearing looks very rubbery or plastic-like to me. Boots look like the garden boots I have in my backyard.
Yes, Jenny, that's exactly the book.
Jenny's on the book there. Excellent. Okay. All right. Time's up. Okay. So it says air raid precautions. So they're again doing a practice of sorts.
Yes, they are. They're involved in gas decontamination. So during an attack, there's all kinds of toxins. It can certainly be a lot of concern for chemical warfare, gas warfare. It can be other things, the destruction of gas lines. So you still have gas within different buildings and things, and how to deal with that. It's how to deal with the toxins that have filled areas. So these gentlemen are wearing rubber suits, or possibly heavy canvas. They're wearing two different types of respirators. I mentioned this earlier. So many different types of respirator. You saw the one where the child was inserted directly into the respirator, the Mickey Mouse one. Here we have the gentleman with the haversacks. They are wearing the air raid precaution issued respirator, which is very heavy duty. The filter for it is actually sitting within the bag that's on their chest. And the fellow on the right-hand side is wearing a gas respirator that was distributed to civilians. So interesting here that he's not wearing an ARP mask, that he's making use of something that's been issued to him. So we can always think of shortages. Why is he without or did it get damaged? Did he need a replacement? We also have speculated on who the individual is in the doorway. He does seem to be an official. There is a marking that we can barely see on his right shoulder. He is in coveralls. He's either walked into the photograph or he is perhaps a supervisor for what is going on. Someone asked us earlier about the white tin or can that's attached to the, or is near to the hoses. Not really sure what that is. Perhaps somebody out there knows. And these pictures, I've seen a few from across British Columbia where they're doing everything from sweeping roadways because there's been an attack, cleaning up all the toxic material.
And we should say the Jubilee Hospital that it's here, that it's saying there is actually in Victoria, British Columbia, where we are. So they are here in the capital. Okay, thanks for that, Paul. If you have, we have like, if you had a question, we could probably fit one in, but since I don't see one there, Jenny, let me know if you see one. There was one at the very beginning, which was about, you said your focus is conflict history. So what does that mean?
So for conflict history, because people have asked me before, do you do military history? They never really asked about home front history. I started adding home front history, and I got tired of saying, both all the time. So I've heard others talk about conflict history, and I see it as the study of not just the military actions, the military operations of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, but all that combined effort that is behind them to sustain them on the battlefronts. How do we provide comforts to them? What are the needs in the hospitals for bandages? What are the need for goods in certain areas? Who needs blankets? Who needs clothing because they've lost everything in the Blitz? Letter writing to troops, building up morale. Women's auxiliary units who sponsored individual soldiers, or for HMCS Chilliwack. I used to work in Chilliwack, so I always use this as an example. There was a corvette that's a type of ship. HMCS Chilliwack needed a washing machine, and the ladies auxiliary to HMCS Chilliwack made sure that they got a washing machine to fit their needs.
Right.
How do you get your cars fixed? Well, we're going to train a whole group of new people to that. How are we going to get the job done on the home front? Well, we need to increase employment with women, so on. So I see conflict history as much bigger than either one of the two, and it is really a coordinated effort.
And thanks for that, Paul. And I also think, just to finish up, that the images I noticed that you select, so most of them, I think all of them, were actually not on the front lines of World War II. They were what's going on here at home in British Columbia. And it just makes me think, absolutely, on Remembrance Day, we remember the people that lost their lives in World War II, not just World War II, but all the wars and conflicts. And but that they're so far-reaching that they're connected to us, all their families and friends back home, and all just the civilians in the country they come from. They're all working together in this war effort. So it has huge, far-reaching implications. And thank you for putting that up. Jenny's put in the chat there. I was going to mention as well. So tomorrow is Indigenous Veterans Day here in Canada. Canadians as a whole haven't reflected much on the experience of Indigenous veterans who had some pretty specific experiences returning back home to Canada after the wars. So there is a little bit of information on our learning portal there if you want to explore that further. So thank you. We don't want to go too much over time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Paul. Again,
You're
this
welcome.
was really interesting. And Jenny also put a link there to a section on our learning portal about reading photographs. And so there's some additional material there on how to explore historical photographs more. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.